So thank you for joining us this afternoon. As you've heard, this panel is about global value chains, and we're going to talk about what's changing in the world of global value chains. I'd like to start by introducing the panelists before I get into the concept or the topic a little bit more. And I'm going to start all the way down there on my left, so you're right. And I'm going to introduce engineer Ahmed Al-Baawi. He is the Director or Vice President of Studies for the Saudi Industrial Development Fund. Now, Director or Vice President of Studies sounds a little bit academic, but believe me, his role is anything but academic. We were talking earlier today about the SIDF's role in bringing Lucid Motors to Saudi Arabia. That's a project that's just been announced. Lucid Motors is one of the biggest, fastest growing electric vehicle manufacturers in the world. Their first manufacturing plant outside of the US is going to be built in Saudi Arabia, and I know you and your organization, SIDF, had a key role in that, so congratulations on that project. Next to Ahmed is Christian Rodriguez-Chifel, who also has a very academic title. He's a fellow at the David Rockefeller Center at the Harvard University. So, but he's also anything but academic. So Christian and I have known each other for a while when he was at the World Economic Forum. He then ran the investment promotion agency for Chile, Invest Chile, for several years, was an advisor to the Inter-American Development Bank, and I guess is taking a year out in academia before he re-emerges himself in the real world. So welcome, Christian. Next to Christian, we have Yofi Grant. Yofi heads the Ghana Investment Promotion Center. So the Ghana Investment Promotion Center, as the name indicates, is the agency responsible for promoting Ghana as an investment location, attracting companies to Ghana, and then helping companies set up operations there. I've just heard from Yofi that Ghana is the center of the world. So welcome, Yofi, great to see you. And next to me, James Jan, who most of you probably know. James heads the Investment and Enterprise Division of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, or UNCTAD in short. So the division does many, many things. If some of you are into FDI, foreign direct investment, and FDI statistics, you're probably familiar with the World Investment Report. That is just one of the many publications that James and his team produce every year, which really set the standards in terms of FDI reporting and also FDI statistics. So today's topic, global value chains. When I found out I was moderating this panel, I thought it might be a good idea to understand what global value chains are. And I was fortunate enough last week to be at the University of Cambridge, where my company, Foreign Direct Investment Center, FDI Center, runs a training program for investment promotion agencies. And the head of Cambridge University's Institute for Manufacturing was giving a session. And fortunately, it was on global value chains. So I listened very intently, and I think I know what a global value chain is. So I'm going to try and explain it to you specifically how it differs from a supply chain, because these terms get used interchangeably quite a lot. We hear about global value chain reorganization, we hear about optimization of supply chains, we hear about supply chain resilience, and somehow these terms get mixed up a little bit. So from what I can understand, a supply chain is really about bringing products to customers. It's primarily about logistics. Things get put in a truck, they get put on a container, they get shipped somewhere, they get put in a distribution center, they get broken up, they get put in other vehicles, and finally they make their way to their intended recipient, whether that's a business customer or a consumer. So that's a supply chain. Now, a global value chain is a little different. There's a bit of overlap, but a global value chain is really about, as the name indicates, where value is created. And value could be created in many, many ways. Value can be created in the design of a product. It can be created in marketing. It can be created in the production of different components of the product that are then assembled to generate new value. So value chains are much more complex, much more diverse than supply chains. The other thing I learned last week was that the term value chain is misleading, because a value chain implies that you have this neat structure, A, B, C, D, everything is interlinked in a straight line, which is really not the case. And to illustrate that, the example that is typically used is your phone, right? So most of you have one in your pocket. Quite a few of you have one in your hands right now and are not paying attention. So if you look at your phone, It's probably been designed in Cupertino in California or somewhere in Korea, depending on what you have. Your phone consists of numerous components that were made in Shenzhen, that were made in other parts of the world. It's got a battery in it. That battery has minerals in it. Those minerals were probably mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Australia, Mongolia. Think of the operating system. Who developed that? Who designed that? Right? Think of all the apps that you have on your phone that make it a valuable tool for you. Where were those developed? Where were those designed? Who were the marketing people who actually made your iPhone look so attractive and make it worth as much as it is? So that's a good example of a value chain. Somebody designed it, and just by making it look good and feel good, the value of the phone grew incrementally, much more beyond the actual value of the parts that are in the phone. So if you were to map all of those things around the world, it would not look like a chain. You would have a very messy picture of lots of dots and lines spanning the globe. And that brings us to today's topic. Value chains are global, and they've been global for decades, and they've become increasingly global over the last 30, 40, 50 years, to the point where it's almost impossible to perceive how fragmented and how globally dispersed these value chains are. And what we've been hearing even before the pandemic is that that's changing. Global value chains are transforming. The pandemic supposedly is contributing to this transformation of global value chains. And what we're going to try and unpack for you in the next 50 minutes or so is, how is that happening? Why is it happening? And what does it mean for you? Okay, so that's today's topic. We're going to have time for questions, so please stay. We don't have a door in the back, otherwise we'd close the door to make sure you do stay, but please stay till the end and ask questions afterwards. So I'm going to start with the first question, which is for James, who's written extensively about this. Global value chains are changing. That's what we keep hearing. How are they changing?
Thank you, Andres. It's a great pleasure to be here with the community in person. And that has been after 2 years of difficulties. Now, Andres' question is about what would be the trends of global value chains. I wish to give you a kind of a snapshot what I see the transformation of global value chain leading to 2030 is kind of a decade type of time frame. I would say currently the global value chain is driven by 5 mega trends, or 5 I call them mega drivers. The first is, of course, the realignment of the global economic governance that is happening. This erosion of a multilateralism, moving towards regionalism. And for that, we'll see now this regionalism shaping not in the traditional way, which was based on the economic considerations. So the future direction of regionalism will be more driven by geopolitical rivalries than economic considerations. So there will be different type of regional integration, regional groupings, while further erosion of multilateralism. This also means that the rising of protectionism, and that links to make at home rather than make outside. There'll be further fragmentation of international standards, international rules, and international policy practices. So the rising protectionism will be there. The second mega driver relates to the sustainability imperative. That is, you all know, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals committed by leaders worldwide leading up to 2030. And for that will shape the new investment into the SDG-related sectors, even though the progress is not so fast or not fast enough, but it is getting there. At least we see the increase, even if it's not enough for achieving the SDGs. The third mega driver is the new industrial revolution, and that is, we know already, the Internet of the Thing, the manufacturing, the additive manufacturing, and all these things will drive the value chain in the future directions, and I will explain that later. The fourth mega driver is the corporate accountabilities. As you know, ESG has become a kind of imperative for as a standards for companies to mainstream into their business models, and also all this drive of tax evasion, illicit payment. All these will reshape the business models of the multinationals. The last one, the mega driver, is resilience-driven restructuring of multinational companies. This happened during the pandemic and is further accelerated by the current war in Ukraine and the related developments. So these are the 5 mega drivers that will shape the global value chain in a different patterns, and there will be also and then there will also impact on global trade and investment landscape. Now, the impact on the future global value chain will be, I would see, basically quite a few directions. First, there will be less of a global value chain and more of a regional value chain. And second, there will be a kind of a, for manufacturing, we'll see a kind of a less fragmentation of the value chain and more concentration of the value added. And also there will be kind of the change in services. Services will be the opposite direction. There will be further fragmentation, more offshoring compared with manufacturing. It's because of technology driven. So they are going into the different directions. The fifth one is basically the value chain will be more sustainable, development friendly and related. So these are the 5 directions value chains is moving. Now that will have the impact on the patterns of future trade and investment. The first thing is that, of course, due to the transformation of the value chain, the global efficiency-seeking FDI will be declined, and regional market-seeking FDI is going to increase. Secondly, the trade in intermediary goods will be under the pressure, and there will be possible increase of the trade in final goods and products. And also, the third one will be that we'll see, for manufacturing, they'll be moving from scale to scope. That's another direction we see. And the fourth one we'll see that will be more investment in infrastructure and the services. And the fifth one we'll see a kind of a more investment in blue and the green economy and orange economy. So that will change the global pattern of investment and the trade-related investment. That's what I see is going to happen.
Thank you, James. That's quite a lot of trends. And as you were talking, I was thinking about whether the trends are contradictory in the sense that one trend may be forcing a company to move in one direction, whereas another may be shifting in another direction. So maybe we'll take the trends one by one and try and go through all of them during our session. But the first one seems to imply regionalization, that we're moving towards blocks, right? We're no longer a multilateral global economy, but we're moving to a global economy that's divided, that's fragmented into big blocks, and that companies will need, if they choose that they want to do business globally, they'll need a presence in each of those blocks. Not just a presence, but they'll need to concentrate most, if not all, of their value-adding activities in each block. Is that correct? Am I interpreting it the right way?
There'll be more of a self-contained, the regional, sub-regional value chains instead of global value chain for the 5 drivers as I mentioned. But here I wish to mention also there are 4 trajectories for the transformation with the reshoring, nearshoring, and friendshoring. We call this is one. The second is replication for manufacturing. That's more related to technology-driven. There will be diversification, and that's part of the resilience building. And then I mentioned the regionalization, nearshoring, diversification and replication. Yes, there are 4 trajectories for the transformation.
Okay, Ahmed, I mean, we heard that you've landed Lucid Motors in Saudi Arabia, which is not something that you'd immediately expect, right? So this is a company from the US, their first manufacturing plant is in Arizona. How is that related to some of these trends? What's your view on the trends that James just outlined as to how global value chains are changing?
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Andreas, members of the panel. I think Mr. James made it very easy for me because he really hit it on the head, all the fantastic points of trending. And what I can say is when you're a global company, and let's say you're a company that's aspiring for global markets, with all the changes that are happening around us, whether it's COVID, whether it's the difficulties of reaching new emerging markets and trying to beat competitors that are more, I would say, aggressive in market dynamics, such as Tesla, for example, what you want to do is you want to find an economy that is really basing its growth and investment attractiveness based on taking advantage of the following factors. First of all, they're an economy that's trying to be a future-forward economy. And what I mean by that is that if you are there, you have a global advantage to do business with the region and with all the continents. You want to be a strategic business hub, and that's why Lucid found in Saudi Arabia a strategic business hub where they can easily access Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, and the Indian subcontinent. You want digital revolution and infrastructure commitment, and that is one of the things that Vision 2030 or the government that really provided is that they are developing economic cities that is a very high, hefty investment, and you don't have to worry about moving in and you have to take care of the services and take care of setting up. You can start your operations once you move in. You want game-changing opportunities, and that's what's happening with Saudi Arabia with the Giga projects and the Greenfield projects. And Lucid is in line with the investment of the Greenfield projects being electric vehicle. And also the quality of lifestyle and the prosperity of the nation, meaning you don't want to be in a market and people really cannot afford that vehicle. You want to be in a market where prosperity is part of the vision, where people really see this as a green vehicle and a vehicle that is in line of their values in the future. And also it is very easy for them to conduct business, meaning with the e-visa system right now, I believe more than 40 countries can be accepted for entry on arrival to the major international airports. So the investment that happened in Lucid and attracting Lucid into Saudi Arabia is really in line with the trajectory of Vision 2030, trying to build an automotive industry. Now, initially, it is going to happen in terms of kits and in terms of moving products from the US and assembling them, and that's how it happens usually in a classic global value chain, let's say. But as time progresses, you will start developing the ecosystem, the electronics, the bumpers, the nuts and bolts, the things that will be very meaningful to start up around that factory. So I agree with, and I would like to iterate what James said, that you will find things that are regional and in terms of manufacturing more concentrated and focused on the topic of value add that he just added.
Great points, because as I was hearing you speak, it's a very attractive proposition, and the advantages you outlined would be attractive to most companies. But it wasn't, to me, something new, right? So companies have always invested places with big markets, with good infrastructure, with qualified workforce, a supportive government. But the point you made at the end, I think, is a really, really relevant one. The value add might not be high right now. They'll be assembling kits. But eventually that value will transfer as well. So eventually assembly will transform into manufacturing. Eventually Lucid will start sourcing some components locally that are made locally. They might have some design capabilities locally, some R&D capabilities. They might change the design of their vehicles to suit local and regional markets. So the point I'm hearing is global value chains don't shift overnight. It's a slow process. It's not something that companies can just pack in a suitcase and move. It's something incremental, and it will take time. So one of the questions I'd like to throw to the audience, maybe Christian as well, your thoughts on what we've talked about so far, but also an unscripted question. How long do you think these trends will go on for? In other words, is this something we're going to see for the next 5 years and then the dust will settle? 10 years, 20 years? You know, this changing of global value chains, how long is this going to happen for?
So thanks, Andreas, and of course, James, for the invitation. Probably a more authorized voice than myself. 2 days ago, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, so $10 trillion assets under management, was here literally across the street, in another summit. And one of the things he mentioned is that I think it was a positive message in terms of that the dust will settle, but in the short term, it will be painful. And he talked about 4, 5 to 6 years. And he was also sitting actually with the CEO of Mubadala. And also what he foresaw, and I'll just quote him, is that this is a real change. So I think I will, and definitely just to make it my words, no worries. And I will agree with that. I think that we've come to a point in this, as James was mentioning, you know, we've been talking about the changes of value chains, and companies have been dealing with this for years and years and years. But I think first, of course, the trade wars and the trade tensions, of course, augmented by COVID. Now with the geopolitical situation in the Ukraine and else, it's really going to cause shifts. And it's yet to see. Of course, we have some hints, but it's yet to see who are going to be here the winners and losers, right? I think what we can say now is that firms have been used to be dealing with this from time to time, but now supply chain disruption seems to be the new norm. I wasn't in Cambridge, so I may confuse supply chain and value chain every once in a while. I was in the U.S. hearing about Buy America and getting jobs back, so a little bit of a different message. But I would think so. I would think that that's important. Maybe and just to elaborate on that, I think the geopolitical situation. I think James said it very well. Probably geopolitics are going to be more important than economics, right? And in that sense, I think good to quote President Biden's administration last year executive order to revise the supply chain, particularly in 4 different products: semiconductors, large batteries, and others in the United States. A very thorough 100-year review. That review was submitted in June last year. The report contained the word China 458 times. 458 times it was written China. And that, of course, it said fragile supply chains, concentration of supply, human rights issues, limited resilience, etc. So recommendations including incentives. Recommendations included a number of legislation. The one I like the most, you may have heard from it, it's called CHIPS, but it's actually the Creating Helpful Incentives for the Production of Semiconductors in America Act, and others, of course, which are now being seen in Congress. You may remember from the State of the Union, President Biden saying, give it to me, I'll sign it. That was exactly, this were the legislation he was referring to. So that went on, of course, to a broader assessment that was delivered now at the end of February, and this was expanded to supply chain vulnerabilities, so freight and logistics supply chain, health sector, etc. So clearly, the U.S. is taking, a geopolitical view on securing some of these supply chains. So Japan also pushing a similar process. So the question is, of course, okay, then don't deal, right? It looks like reshoring or nearshoring is guaranteed. Not so fast. Not so. And we can come back to that, but I think one of the things that what the policy wants to settle, it may work for things, and happy to come back to that later, for example, semiconductors, and there's specific examples on that, but maybe not for everything, because the companies and the firms have a different pace than just the regulation.
Great, thank you, Christian. By the way, somebody in the back, can you hear us? Yeah? Okay. David, good? All right, can you hear everybody? All right, perfect. So thank you, Christian. So we've heard that governments are also driving this, and you touched upon two of the mega drivers that James had mentioned. So again, the topic of regionalization, regional blocks, then the topic of resilience, which seems to be a priority for governments. So if you look at semiconductors, semiconductor companies have in the past been market seeking, efficiency seeking. I mean, they've gone to places where they get the best deal pretty much. And now you're seeing governments in Europe, in the US, in India. I'm not sure if anybody is here from India, from Invest in India. India has a huge semiconductor attraction strategy. Governments are really putting money into this. So governments are using huge amounts of money to entice some of these companies to alter their value chains for the sake of resilience. So my question, Yofi, is to you. So first of all, an open question. Any comments you'd like to add to what's been discussed already? But also in the context of Africa and Ghana specifically, how do you fit into this when you see the likes of India, the US, spending billions to make sure that value chains land or go their way?
I think it's a very interesting dynamic. And yes, certainly the geopolitical seems to be leading the direction of how global value chains will be shaped. Because we all understand from age-old, history, one crosses into another country in search of economic gains. And so that is clearly true. And it's also very clearly true that efficiencies will be derived from regional plays. But for me, from a purely consumer point of view, I think there are three factors beyond the geopolitical that will determine how global value chains play out, especially with the recent dynamic of, trade disruptions and, internalization. And as we had the discussion yesterday, I say the death of globalization. And what does it really mean for global trade and global value chains? There are three factors that come into play: resources, the efficiency of supply chains, and markets. Because those three are constantly in a dynamic phase. The only one that is more stable is resources. So you take Africa, for example, resource rich. 90% of the world's platinum and chromium, as I have it here. 50% of the world's gold. 90% of the world's cobalt. 75% of the world's coltan. Significant resources in lithium, which is required for Industry 4.0, or for what you call 5.0 now, and other value chains. And you wonder, okay, so the disruptions that are occurring now, is it going to be in the interest of Africa, a resource-rich continent? And mind you, 65% of the remaining arable land left in the world to feed the world is in Africa. So the Africa play is very much now right in the front of global value chains. Now, the efficiency of supply chains. And we all realize what happened with COVID. Shipping costs went up over 100% because suddenly China shut its doors. And China, being the world's, should I say, factory, meant that other countries had to now devise other means of getting the resources and the products that they wanted. They couldn't get them from China. And then, of course, markets. Markets in themselves are shifting. Where's the biggest markets today? Everybody says, oh, well, it's where the money is. But I tell you, Africa is a continent with a population of 1.4 billion people. Combined GDP of 3.3 trillion. By 2050, it's estimated that that population will go to 2.6 billion and will be 1/4 of the world's population. A combined GDP expected to be over 7 trillion. So that is definitely an opportunity waiting to happen. And anybody looking at global value chains will say, that's a market that we should be looking at. Now, Africa is the fastest urbanizing continent. In the past 10 years, 10 of the fastest growing economies, 7 of them have been from Africa. Now, that tells you a certain trend that is happening, that this is a continent that might have been asleep, but now is waking up and offers a tremendous opportunity for the corporate that wants to relocate and looking for market. Now, efficiencies may be elsewhere, but at the end of the day, efficiencies are to ascertain and determine markets. And so, even if the efficiencies are in other regions now, the target market will be, where can I sell my product? Where can I sell my service? And the biggest opportunity today lies in Africa.
Completely agree with you. I mean, the numbers themselves are staggering, and you mentioned some numbers that are really impressive. Fastest growing economies in Africa, the arable land, the percentage of certain critical minerals. So a question to you first, Yofi, and then to all of the other panelists, if they'd like to contribute. How do you prevent what has happened in other parts of the world, that investors come, extract those minerals, ship them off somewhere else to be processed somewhere else? In other words, the value adding takes place somewhere else. How do you prevent that investors come, buy your farmland, take those crops, the commodities, and ship them off to other continents to be processed there? In other words, the value adding is not happening at source. What are the instruments that you can use to ensure that value is really being created in Africa?
You're absolutely right, Andreas. I mean, and if you look at the African continent, you've mentioned the typical situation where erstwhile we've exported our resources and imported the finished goods on that. But Ghana has turned that around, and we're saying, as the second largest cocoa producer in the world, we are going to limit the amount of cocoa beans that we export. But we're going to increase and incentivize value add right in Ghana, such that we have better value on the product from a country perspective than before. Now, it's just not that. We have significant resources, bauxite resources, which we used to export as bauxite, but now you can't export the bauxite. You have to convert into alumina and convert to aluminium, which is higher up the value chain and will therefore bring the country more revenues. So it's a lot of policy, country policy focus that, well, yeah, we have the resources, we need the investment, but we're only going to incentivize investment that leads to value addition of the resources, such that we are now also competing in the world as an exporter of finished goods. And there are enough resources in Africa